Hello everybody. Today we're going to pick up where we left off last time with some more of our European settler portraits and the stories behind them. The settlers we looked at in our last episode were Scots, but not all of Otago's earliest European settlers were Scottish. Dennis and Joanna Heenan, who arrived in Otago on the Mariner in 1850, were from County Offaly in the heart of Ireland. Dennis and Joanna brought 11 of their 12 Irish-born children with them. Their eldest son Dennis was already here, having emigrated a few months earlier, and a 13th child, Margaret, was born a few weeks after the family arrived. The Heenans settled in Dunedin's northeast valley, and also lived at Mangatua at West Taieri for a time. Scarlet fever visited the Heenan household in the early 1860s and claimed the lives of Margaret, then aged about 10, and her elder brother James, who was in his mid-teens. Then in 1868, Dennis, who was more than 15 years older than Joanna, passed away at the age of 84. The Heenans were said to have originally been Catholic back in Ireland, until a falling out with the local priest saw them switch allegiances. In Dunedin, they became parishioners of Knox Presbyterian Church, led by Reverend Dr. Donald Stewart. This portrait of Dr. Stewart is by Dennis and Joanna's granddaughter, Joanna Flanagan, who studied and exhibited at the Dunedin School of Art in the 1870s, and was married to William Sibbald by Dr. Stewart at Knox Church in 1880. The Strains were another Irish family living in North East Valley. Hans and Mary Jane Strain were from Ireland's north. They arrived here on the Cornwall in 1849, bringing their 5 Irish-born children with them. And they produced 4 more children here in the years that followed, prior to Hans's death in 1857. Hans's untimely death had occurred when he was returning home driving a bullock sledge. He was said to have fallen from the sledge face down in the road in such a state of intoxication that he was unable to get up and had suffocated in the mud. Sarah was the eldest of Hans's and Mary Jane's children. In 1856, some 18 months before her father's death, she married fellow Northern Irishman James Martin. James Martin had originally arrived in New Zealand in 1841, brought here along with his siblings by his widowed father Robert. The Martins initially lived in Wellington until Robert came to Otago to work for surveyor Charles Kettle and took up land in the Milton area. James eventually followed his father to South Otago and acquired a neighbouring farm where he and Sarah would raise a family of 11 children, although 3 would die young. 6-year-old Eliza in April 1874, 2-year-old Louisa in November 1874, and 18-year-old James in 1879. Sarah and James's 11th and last child, Frederick, was born in October 1880. According to family tradition, the day after he was born, Sarah handed him to her eldest daughter, Mary Jane, who was by then aged 23, and said to her, "He's yours to look after," and she passed away soon after. Frederick would become a baker when he grew up. He was also known for producing oil paintings. However, the artist or artists who produced these portraits of his parents is unknown. When Sarah's father Hans had passed away in 1857 after falling from the bullock sledge in a drunken stupor, he had been in the company of his North East Valley neighbours John and Emily Duff. Scottish-born bookmaker John Duff had arrived in Dunedin with his widowed father and his sister on the Larkins in 1849. Emily Duff, née Cameron, another Scot, had arrived in Otago on the Slains Castle in 1852. She and John married at the end of 1853 and began raising a family. By 1856, they were living in North East Valley. So what happened on that terrible evening in 1857 when Hans Strain lost his life? According to newspaper accounts, this is likely how the drama unfolded. John and Hans had stopped at a mate's house on their way back from town. Emily left them to it and continued to walk home. Both John and Hans had been drinking whiskey. Hans eventually left the mate's house with the sledge, and John followed shortly thereafter. John caught up with Hans near Dr. Purdy's house in North Dunedin, where he found Hans had fallen off the sledge. He tried to put him back on the sledge, but he couldn't manage it on his own and went to find Dr. Purdy to give him a hand. When he and Dr. Purdy arrived back, they found Hans and the sledge had disappeared. Emily, meanwhile, was nearing the Water of Leith when she was overtaken by the sledge, which was now driverless. When Hans failed to arrive home, his daughter and others went out to look for him and found his lifeless body lying on the road. Dr. Purdy was again called into action, but Hans Strain was dead. As for John Duff, he had gone back to his mate's place to sober up before resuming his journey to North East Valley. He finally arrived home around daybreak the next morning, with no memory of how he got there. John's drinking habits and behaviour did not improve in the years that followed, and as a result of his intemperance, he became estranged from his wife and children. Shortly after the death of youngest daughter Christina in December 1864, Emily and John got into a disagreement that left Emily fearing for her life. John was brought before the magistrate and bound over to keep the peace or be sent to prison. In 1867, he would indeed face time behind bars, receiving 2 months' hard labour after being convicted of a serious assault, and in 1870 was put back in jail for 3 months due to his habitual drunkenness. In March 1873, a group of Chinese labourers employed on drainage works at William Telford's farm near Balclutha were out gathering firewood when they made a grisly discovery. In the bush across the Puirua stream, they spied a very decomposed body, a clothed skeleton almost, hanging from a tree by a piece of woven flax rope. It was soon determined that the remains were those of John Duff, who'd been missing since Christmas. The coroner's verdict at the inquest held 3 weeks after the discovery of the remains was that John Duff had committed suicide by hanging himself from a tree on or about Boxing Day 1872 while suffering from temporary insanity. On that sad note, we'll say see you next time when we hope to bring you some happier stories. Thanks for watching.